Good evening and welcome to the next session of the Information Bureau Integrated COVID Series conducted by Government Medical College, Kozhikode. Today, we are extremely lucky and happy to have with us Dr. Shamir Vikesh sir. Today's session will be on COVID-19 clinical presentation and management. Thank you and over to you, sir.
Okay, good evening all. So without wasting much time, we will go directly to the topic. As you know, we are in the biggest wave ever of COVID-19 and we are having a very tough time now. All over India, the situation is very bad and Kerala is yet to see such a bad phase, but we are also on the verge of such a calamity. So with this introduction, we will just see what are the important clinical features and how we are managing COVID-19 now. So clinical features, I will be this mainly based on Kerala government guideline, which is recently released around 1 or 2 weeks back. So as you all know, when do we suspect a COVID-19? So any acute respiratory illness, that is any patient coming with a fever, cough, running nose, throat pain, headache, or any symptom suggestive of a respiratory tract infection with either a residence or a travel to a location where community transmission is happening now. So if somebody is coming from such a place or somebody has traveled to such a place within the last 14 days, so that means it's not relevant now in this context because throughout India, everywhere the community transmission is already happening. So anyone within our country who is coming with such an acute respiratory illness should be a COVID suspect. So if we are talking something beyond this level, that means after 1 month or 2 months when we expect the COVID-19 wave to get over, in such a context, when a patient comes with such a respiratory illness and he has a definite contact with a confirmed COVID-19 in the last 14 days, again, we will consider him as a COVID suspect. So any acute respiratory tract infection, and we usually call it by a name called influenza-like illness. So you can see the term ILI written over the case sheets and all the documents, etc. So any influenza-like illness occurring in a patient in such a setting, either a resident of a area with a community transmission or a travel to such an area, or anyone who has a contact with a confirmed COVID-19 patient is to be considered as a suspect case. And another context is, another term again you will come across often in this context is SARI, that is severe acute respiratory illness. So you can even see one ICU in our college written as SARI ICU, that is severe acute respiratory illness. So any patient coming with a severe respiratory infection symptoms like cough and breathing difficulty, who needs a hospitalization for such symptoms, and we don't have any alternate diagnosis, like it's not a case of tuberculosis or any pulmonary edema, etc. So we don't have any alternate diagnosis, but patient is having a severe acute respiratory illness. Again, you have to consider it as a COVID-19. So these are the suspect COVID-19 case patients, and we do an investigation, any sort of investigations like antigen, PCR, TrueNat, or anything like that. If you get a positive result, then it is considered as a confirmed COVID-19. And you need not have a typical symptom to diagnose a COVID-19. Even with atypical symptoms, if you have a molecular diagnosis, like a PCR positive in a patient, presenting with an entirely different symptom, again, we will consider him as a confirmed COVID-19. So there are a lot of atypical presentations with which a COVID-19 patient can come. And some of the examples are young stroke. So till the arrival of this COVID-19 infection, the students may be knowing when we discuss young stroke, we had a lot of prothrombotic conditions which we usually discuss in our bedside discussions. But we never included an infection like this. But now After 2019, when we get a patient with a young stroke, we immediately think of a COVID-19 also. So then Kawasaki disease, you will be more familiar from pediatrics. And there is something called multi-system inflammatory syndrome. I'll be giving the details later. Any patient coming with features suggestive of septic shock, any acute coronary syndrome, any GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, any Adam-like presentation, that means acute demyelinating encephalomyelitis, that is what is called an Adam, that means a diffuse demyelination of the brain and spinal cord. Acute encephalitis, you have a lot of causes for viral encephalitis, and now after the arrival of COVID-19, when somebody comes with the features of viral encephalitis, again, you think of COVID-19. Conjunctivitis is recently included as a symptom of COVID-19. Some people come with a combination of respiratory illness along with conjunctivitis, and some come with conjunctivitis alone. And you are very familiar with this symptom, that is loss of taste and loss of smell, which can be a classical symptom of COVID-19. So you can get combination of these symptoms or isolated presentation of one of these symptoms. Again, you have to suspect a COVID-19. So it's a very wide spectrum of symptoms and signs which you can expect in a COVID-19 patient. So this is for the easier management purpose. The Kerala government has divided it into 3 categories. It's not something which is universally applicable. It is for our practical management purpose. It's a Kerala government guideline categorizes COVID-19 into 3 categories. And the category A is the mildest form of COVID-19. So it constitutes the mild sore throat, mild cough, rhinitis. Sometimes it can present with the GI manifestations, with diarrhea and anosmia. So all these things are very, very mild symptoms when we call them as a category A. But the same symptom, if it is a severe throat pain, severe cough, severe diarrhea, which is something disabling for the patient, with the presence of fever, we categorize them as category B. Also, a category A, that is a mild symptom in presence of some comorbidities like an uncontrolled diabetes or hypertension, a person who was having an organ damage like chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, any sort of chronic diseases, any patient on a long-term steroid or other immunosuppressant treatments, a person who is pregnant, any person who is more than 60 years. With this background, if somebody develops a category A COVID symptoms, even they are also classified as category B. So category A means mild, category B means a severe symptom or a mild symptom on top of a comorbidity or some other risk factor. And category C is the situation where this patient develops a complication like a lower respiratory tract involvement like pneumonia or something more than a pneumonia. That is patient developing a breathlessness, a chest pain, and some other organ involvement like a brain involvement or a kidney involvement or something like a sepsis, that is hypotension, cyanosis, hemoptysis. All these things make the patient more sick, and then it is categorized as category C. Or it need not be the problem with the COVID alone. It can be also the worsening of his underlying condition. That means he was already having a heart disease. Then he is developing a COVID-19 and his heart disease has worsened now. He is developing pulmonary edema or he is having recurrent angina. Still, the patient can be categorized as category C. So these are the typical symptoms and the presentation a patient can have. And this is how we categorize into category A, B, and C. So another type of classification, which is again for our practical management purpose, is the different staging of COVID-19 into mild, moderate, and severe. So mild means patient is having only mild symptoms like cough or throat pain. There is no breathlessness or hypoxia. Then those group are called as mild. When the patient has either a breathlessness or a hypoxia or together, breathlessness and hypoxia together, then the patient is considered as moderate or severe. Then the classification, the differentiation between moderate and severe is based on the oxygen saturation and respiratory rate. When the oxygen saturation is less than or equal to 94, so 94 is taken as the cutoff, 95 is taken as the cutoff. If it comes to 94, that means the stage is changing into moderate, and the respiratory rate more than or equal to 24, that is moderate. And the same, if the respiratory rate goes beyond 30, it is severe, and saturation falls below 90, it is severe. So no breathlessness, no hypoxia, that is mild. Hypoxia less than 95 or 94 to 90 is moderate. Respiratory rate 24 to 30 is moderate. Respiratory rate more than 30 and saturation less than 90 is severe. So you may be aware that all the patients who take treatment at their home or who are treated in some minor centers like first line treatment center, they are always given a warning. The treating person or the patient himself is given a warning. They will be told the red flag signs. And these are the breathing difficulty, breathlessness, and oxygen saturation. So somebody is taking treatment at home and who is having a pulse oximeter is asked to monitor his SpO2. And whenever he has a value less than 95, he is asked to contact the hospital. So that means from that stage, it is considered as a moderate. And if it is less than 90 and respiratory rate more than 30, it is considered as a severe. So passing through these stages and categorization, I was also indirectly talking about the different symptoms and signs a patient can have. I have covered almost all the common symptoms here, and the rare symptoms and signs we will be going to the details later. And also you have to remember that majority of the patients, we cannot even call them patients. The persons infected with COVID-19 can be totally asymptomatic also. So a wide majority of people who are COVID-19 positive by our diagnostic methods can have no symptoms at all. So they can be asymptomatic, they can be mildly symptomatic, and they can have a moderate and severe symptoms. So if we take 100 patients, around 10 to 15% of patients will have moderate or severe symptoms. All the rest of the patients, that is 80 to 85%, will have only either asymptomatic or mild symptoms only. And among this, around 5% gets severely sick who may require even an ICU admission. That is the statistics all over the world. So these are the usual investigations we do when a patient comes for admission. They don't require all the exhaustive investigations when somebody is diagnosed with COVID-19 and all, because as we were already talking, majority are asymptomatic and majority have only mild symptoms. So you need not investigate all these people. When they are sick, when they are having a moderate or severe illness and they are coming for a hospital admission, these are the important parameters which we see in our laboratory investigations. So one is the CBC, that is a complete blood count. And what you have to remember in complete blood count is the absolute lymphocyte count. So the absolute lymphocyte count tells you about the prognosis of the patient. So when they have a relative lymphopenia, the lymphocyte count is very low. So that always have to make us cautious that the patient can worsen any time in the future. So another parameter is the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. That means the percentage, the proportion of neutrophil to lymphocyte. Again, when it is very high, the value, absolute value is given in the slide. So neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is high. We have to again worry. There can be a worsening in the coming days. So another important parameters where you all may be aware of the pathology of this COVID-19. What is happening is mainly the inflammatory reactions and the reaction of our own immunity, the hyperinflammatory state. That is the thing which is causing majority of the issues in COVID-19. So one important parameter which we usually do is the C-reactive protein. So very high CRP. Sometimes we get even CRP more than 100 and all when the patient is having a very high, highly reactive inflammatory state. Something called as a cytokine storm. So that is the usual term used for that, cytokine storm syndrome and all. So in such a situation, you get a very high CRP. And ferritin, again an acute inflammatory reactant, which gets elevated when there is a hyperinflammatory response. So you get a high ferritin, high LDH. Troponin, again, is usually used as the biomarker of cardiac injury. So we get usually a high levels of troponin also when patient is having a cytokine storm. And D-dimer. D-dimer is a very, very important marker which is used in severe COVID-19 patients. The severe COVID-19 is also considered as a prothrombotic state. So when the D-dimer goes above levels of 1000 nanograms, that means the patient can have a lot of complications, and that is an indication for changing our treatment strategies. At the same time, when the patient develops the complication one by one, he can have multiple organ involvement, something like a sepsis. You know what is happening in sepsis. The infection is occurring at one site, but later it gradually affects the whole body. One by one organ is affected and many organs damaged together, which is called as the multiple organ dysfunction syndrome. So similarly, COVID-19 can also affect multiple organs at a time. So you can look at the organ functions, and the most important organ function which we usually assess and which is usually getting affected is the kidney after lungs. So the COVID-19 comes to the upper airway first, then goes to the lower airway, causes problems in the lungs, and from there the inflammation, the war between the immunity of the body and the virus takes place, and this leads to the increased inflammatory response, the cytokine storm. Then one organ after the other gets affected, and it finally goes to the state of multi-organ dysfunction. And CPK is also another factor which gets highly elevated during severe COVID-19. So these are the investigations not for the proper diagnosis of COVID-19, but mainly assessing the severity of COVID-19, the chance of progression to a severe disease, and what is the level of inflammatory state in the body. And I have not included the diagnosis of COVID-19 as such in this session, because I think you may be having another session of microbiology on COVID-19, because it itself is a vast topic. So usually what we use are the antigen test or the RNA-based test, which is called the PCR, or some modification of the RNA-based test like TrueNat, CBNat, etc. These are the investigations which we use for confirming COVID-19, either an antigen test or an RNA-based test. RNA-based test can be then RT-PCR or a modification like TrueNat or CBNat. And antibody test we never use for the management purpose of the acute COVID-19. It is more for a zero surveillance, or how many percentage of the society have been infected by COVID-19. That answer can be given by an antibody, not for an acute management. So after this, what we usually do is the X-ray. You can see a variety of picture you can see in COVID-19 radiology. So this is one of the X-rays of our own patient. So what I was talking was, when you have a typical bacterial pneumonia, what you call a consolidation, usually you see something like a typical patch involving one of the lobes, like a right upper lobe, left lower lobe, like that. But here you see something like a patchy opacities, not a specific localization to a particular lobe or a particular pattern, but bilateral diffuse shadows you can see, patchy shadows. So that is one of the pictures of X-ray of a COVID pneumonia. So this is something called a bronchopneumonia, a pattern which we see in a bronchopneumonia. So this is another very bad X-ray, which again from one of our patients in ICU, you can see almost there is no normal lung here, almost bilateral. The whole lung fields are whitened out. So you can see a lot of such X-rays also in COVID-19. So one of the other important investigations which we use for diagnosis of COVID-19 is CT thorax, HR-CT thorax. So you might have heard in many parts of the world, outside Kerala, in North India, even in many other countries, even COVID was diagnosed using a CT thorax without an antigen or a PCR test. So that's also a system there. When you have a typical presentation like breathlessness is there, the patient is having a typical background, even if the patient is not having a COVID-19 positivity, sometimes we make use of CT thorax for a diagnosis. So the typical pattern is called the ground glass opacity. Just like the X-ray we saw now, the CT will also reveal peripheral and bilateral ground glass opacities. That is a classical term, and with or without consolidations. And in between, you can see this a term used is a crazy paving. So that's not that important for you, but better you make familiar with this term, because you may get a lot of CTs reports being sent by your relatives and near ones from. I am getting regularly CT reports from outside Kerala because they don't get any doctor to see there. So they send the CT reports, and you can see a term like CORADS. That means a COVID-19 reporting and data system. This is divided into 6 categories. This CORADS just tells you what is the possibility of being a COVID. By seeing the CT report or the CT picture, what is the possibility of COVID-19 as the diagnosis. So if it says as 6, that means the chance of COVID-19 is almost 100%. If it says only 1, that means the chance of COVID-19 is very, very less. So that's an alternate way of diagnosing COVID-19 using a CT thorax. But at the same time, you can also see something called a CT severity score. That means how much severely the lung is affected by COVID-19. So if the score is very high, like more than 15, that means it's a severe involvement. And if it is less than 8, it is mild. So these two things are entirely different. One is what is the possibility of COVID-19, what is the probability of COVID-19 as a diagnosis in this patient. That is the first one. And second one tells you how severely the lung is involved in COVID-19. So these two things I have included in the slide only because so many people send reports and ask the opinion now. So by seeing this, even students are sending CT reports of their relatives. So by seeing this report itself, you can get an idea what is it talking about. So again, going back to the basic mechanism, which you have already, maybe you have heard in some other class, how these things happen. You have the first phase when the virus comes and attacks the upper respiratory tract. And from there, the virus makes copy of themselves, and there is a viremic phase. So there is an increased multiplication of the virus, and this is the viremic phase where you start to develop symptoms like fever, body pain, fatigue, cough, etc. And then it goes to the pulmonary phase where the majority, the major symptoms would be like respiratory symptoms like cough, and sometimes it may progress into a pneumonia where the patient can develop symptoms like breathlessness, etc. And during the same time, as the virus multiplication goes on one side, our body starts fighting against the virus by our own immune system. So the inflammatory mediators, all these cells, macrophages, and all these pro-inflammatory cells are recruited, and they start secreting a large amount of pro-inflammatory mediators, like the common term used are the cytokines. And then a war goes on between this virus on one side and inflammatory mediators on one side. And usually in majority what happens, this will be a control system. So the inflammatory markers naturally comes down, the virus gets killed and removed from the body. At the same time, the inflammatory mediators also come down, and that is the settlement. That the whole thing is settled and the patient starts recovering. But in some of them, this inflammatory response goes unchecked or uncontrolled. It's something like a malignant process of inflammatory reaction. There is an uncontrolled secretion of mediators, and that results in something called the hyperinflammatory syndrome or the cytokine storm. So the same thing is depicted in this picture also. This is the entry of the virus and initial attack to the cells. Then the inflammatory mediator, inflammatory cells, inflammatory mediator cytokines. You can see the different types of inflammatory mediators, and the final, the cytokine storm. At the same time, it can affect almost all organs in the body. It starts with the lungs. Then it can have symptoms in the GI like diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, in the brain, in the heart, in the liver, kidneys, and a very, very important part of the body which is affected is the circulation, the blood vessels of the body. So different organ systems in the cardiovascular system, it can cause the direct involvement of the myocardium, that is myocarditis. It can lead to ventricular dysfunction. It can develop into cardiomyopathy, and also coronary artery disease is a manifestation of COVID-19. In the respiratory system, it can cause a pneumonia, bronchopneumonia, and the result can be, at least in a minority, it can result in pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary artery embolism is one of the commonest causes of mortality in COVID-19. It can attack the kidneys, it can cause an acute kidney injury, and it can worsen the previous kidney disease. One of the very important issues which we face in our hospital is chronic kidney disease patients getting COVID-19 and their kidney function is worsened all of a sudden, and many of them ending up in hemodialysis, and a very significant percentage of death also are in patients who is already having a chronic kidney disease. There are a variety of dermatological manifestations, neurological, which include mild things like loss of smell and loss of taste because of the olfactory and gustatory dysfunction. It can have vague symptoms like headache, sleep dysregulation, a difficulty in concentration, something called a brain fog, to a dangerous things like stroke, viral encephalitis, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. Can have psychiatric manifestations like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, fatigue, and dysautonomia is also described as a part of COVID-19. So after COVID-19, do all people recover? Again, the answer is no. So some of them, especially those people who are admitted in ICUs, they can have something called a post-critical illness syndrome, because somebody who was admitted in in the ICU for 2 or 3 weeks, naturally we expect a prolonged issues in them. They take a long time to recover. That is called the post-critical illness problem. Another one is post-viral fatigue syndrome. I'll be explaining later. And some people can develop an organ damage, like a kidney injury, like a lung fibrosis, like a myocarditis leading to cardiomyopathy, etc. And some people without any of this, without any specific organ involvement, without any ICU admission, still they may have some sort of fluctuating symptoms and signs. which lasts for few months after recovery from COVID-19. So this is one CT of our own patients again. You can see it was taken around 3-4 months after the recovery. So this is showing a pulmonary fibrosis. So even after 3 or 4 months, patient can have a long-lasting defect in many of the organs. One of this is a sequelae of pneumonia leading to pulmonary fibrosis, and patient can have a prolonged exertional breathlessness and exertional desaturation. So these are the main organs which can be damaged, that is a lung, heart, kidney, and the nervous system. And another important issue is the worsening of the pre-existing disease. Again, a chronic respiratory, chronic kidney, chronic heart disease, and other degenerative diseases like Parkinsonism, motor neuron disease, etc. When they get a Alzheimer's disease, when they get a COVID-19, we can see a worsening of their pre-existing illness. So this is one patient, again our own experience, who was having a COVID-19 mild symptoms. He was discharged from a first-line treatment center, and then he was okay. He had only a mild symptom, but he came back with severe dyspnea 1 week after discharge. And you can see the ECG. This ECG shows sinus tachycardia with something called RV strain pattern. You may not be that thorough in ECG. You can leave that. And you can see the discharge summary showing the D dimer more than 10,000. That is a very high D dimer, an abnormal ECG. And the CT scan, again, the report you can read, it's a pulmonary arterial saddle embolism. That is a pulmonary artery embolism. That means a mild COVID discharged from a first-line treatment center, coming back with a severe dyspnea, and the CT scan is showing a pulmonary embolism. And his D dimer was very, very high. This is another patient who was transferred from COVID to our medicine ward after being negative. You can see the difference between the links, a unilateral limb edema, and the Doppler showed a deep vein thrombosis. So you can get a lot of thrombotic complications in COVID-19. So COVID-19 is considered as a prothrombotic state due to various reasons. One of the reasons is again the hyperinflammatory response, that is the cytokine storm, which itself is a prothrombotic. Hypoxia leading to increased blood viscosity, and a lot of other factors induced by hypoxia, which can be again a prothrombotic, and a pre-existing disease, which is already a prothrombotic state, and also the immobilization, ICU admission, etc. All these things together make COVID-19 a prothrombotic condition, and pulmonary thromboembolism is a very, very important complication which have to be kept in mind while we manage a COVID-19 patient. So another patient, he's not a patient, he's a doctor. He was again COVID-19 positive and treated in a COVID hospital. And after discharge, he frequently started complaining about of palpitations, and his ECG was like this. Again, I'm leaving the ECG, it's showing a multifocal atrial tachycardia. It's one of the cause of tachyarrhythmia, one of the patterns in tachyarrhythmia. So again, COVID can affect the heart in different ways, and the most common is myocarditis. Myocarditis can later lead to cardiomyopathy and LV dysfunction, and different types of arrhythmias are known, and it can precipitate an ischemic heart disease. Ischemic heart disease is not something which is all of a sudden produced by a COVID-19, but a person who was already having an ischemic heart disease can be precipitated. It can, COVID-19 can precipitate an acute event in an ischemic heart disease. And a lot of non-specific symptoms, like if somebody who is known to you, your classmate or your friends who had a COVID-19 last 1 month back, and now he or she is repeatedly complaining of fatigue or aches and pains, don't call him a psychiatric. You have some manasigaanu, anakku pediyanu, tension aanu പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ പുച്ഛിക്കരുത്, because it is a well-known factor that at least a minority patient can have different irritating symptoms like aches and pains and fatigue, insomnia, Exertional dyspnea without any lung involvement, the X-ray is normal, CT scan is normal, but still they are finding it difficult to do routine activities, climbing steps or even walking becomes difficult for them. A long-lasting cough without any damage to the lungs and atypical chest pain, loss of taste and smell, all these things can last for weeks to months, and these are non-specific symptoms which can occur in a post-COVID phase. And another thing is chronic fatigue syndrome, almost similar to the description which is given already. This is called a myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is a well-known entity which is known for a chronic fatigue, malaise, and unrefreshing sleep. And a majority of the causes were attributed to viral etiology. And nowadays, the COVID-19 is also considered as a virus which can cause a chronic fatigue syndrome. Another important issue in COVID is diabetes, the relationship between diabetes and COVID. As you know, the COVID-19 virus gets its entry through the ACE2 receptors into the lungs and other parts of the body also. These ACE2 receptors are present in the pancreas also. So it can get a direct entry into the pancreas and it can cause damage to the islet cells of pancreas. At the same time, the cytokine storm, the hyperinflammatory response, is a pro-diabetic, diabetogenic condition. All these factors are something which can stimulate the formation of diabetogenic atmosphere in the body. The stress, another important factor again, which can cause a hyperglycemia. And one of the important treatment which we offer in COVID is steroids, and steroids can also induce hyperglycemia. So because of so many factors together, the COVID-19 is a condition where the patient can develop a diabetes for the first time, or an already non-diabetic, when he gets COVID-19, the blood sugar becomes uncontrolled. And even a person who was controlled with a minimal dose of anti-diabetic medication requires very high doses of insulin for weeks to months time. That is a very common seen in our COVID wards. And elderly, when they get COVID-19, other issues like sarcopenia, malnutrition, depression, delirium, and chronic aches and pains are very common in elderly. Another thing recently identified is a COVID-19 patient who can develop secondary infection. Secondary bacterial infection were very well known. We used to give antibiotics for secondary bacterial coverage. But nowadays, it is also known that COVID-19 patients can develop secondary fungal infections like invasive pulmonary aspergillosis. So Candida infection, Aspergillus infection, etc. are also now found to occur in patients suffering from COVID-19. So I was using this term before, that is a multi-system inflammatory syndrome. MIS-C, that was the common term used, that is C for children. So it was a very common, relatively common complication following a COVID-19 in children. It is something like a Kawasaki disease, something like a vasculitis, but now it is identified that it can happen in adults also. So what happens is, patient already had an exposure to COVID-19, in some sort of infection had already happened in the previous 3 months' time. Now he is coming with multi-system involvement. Multiple organs are affected, but the main involvement is not lungs. So in acute COVID-19, the major insult is for the lungs. So lung is affected, there is hypoxia, and hypoxia causing multiple other organ dysfunction. But here, the major dysfunction is not in the lungs. So it's an extra pulmonary organ involvement. Major affection is for the heart, like cardiac dysfunction, patient comes in hypotension, and patient can have lot of thromboembolic manifestations like pulmonary embolism. At the same time, when you do the investigations, you see that the inflammatory markers are very, very high, like very high CRP, very high D-dimer, etc., which occurs in acute COVID-19 also. So this combination of symptoms and signs with the lab values, we have to consider something called a multi-system inflammatory syndrome of adults. So just keep in mind that such a term, this can occur in adults also, which was well known in children. This is a recent entity. Okay. So I was just mentioning some of the common symptoms, how we classify COVID-19, how we stage COVID-19, and what are the complications which can occur during the acute COVID-19 and just following the COVID-19 period. So now I'm going to the management part. I won't be describing the full details of different drugs and the trials and all. I will be just enumerating different drugs. Very short discussion will be on management. So in general, no NSAID should be used in COVID. So whatever may be the level of pain, body pain can be there, you give paracetamol. So for fever and body pain, paracetamol, and there is no other NSAID. In category A, that means just mild fever, cough, throat pain, etc. You need to give only symptomatic treatment. Again, the main drug is paracetamol only. No need of other antivirals or sophisticated drugs when the patient is having a mild symptom. Just ask him to remain at his own house. Take all precautions to prevent infection getting transmitted to a second person, and just take symptomatic treatment, relax and eat and drink enough and relax. That is the treatment in category A. No antibiotic is indicated in COVID-19 unless there is an evidence of secondary bacterial infection. So you must have seen a lot of prescriptions with azithromycin, amoxicillin, cloxacillin, etc. There is no indication for any of these antibiotics in COVID-19. And if the patient is already on some other medications like anti-diabetic or aspirin or anticoagulant, ask them to continue the same medications if he is having only a mild COVID-19 symptoms. So when the symptoms are much severe throat pain, severe cough, etc., that is category B, or patient is having some other risk factors, two drugs which are advised as per Kerala government guidelines. I will be very, very specific here because personally, I don't advise ivermectin in all these patients because the evidence for ivermectin is very minimum. All throughout the world, international trials have failed to show much evidence for ivermectin, but our guideline gives this as an option. So I am including this drug in my presentation also. So ivermectin is included as a treatment in category B. The dose is 200 microgram per kilogram. That is, a maximum dose is 12 milligram given for 3 to 5 days. And another option for moderate symptoms where patient is having a severe cough lasting for more than 5 days is inhaled steroid. That is budesonide inhalers. It is recently included in the treatment protocol. It is included both internationally as well as our local guidelines. Say you can give budesonide inhalers 800 microgram twice daily. So when the patient goes to category C, that means patient has already developed breathing difficulty and hypoxia. And in category C itself, if the respiratory rate is less than 30, the saturation is more than 90, that is in between 90 and 94. One of the antivirals advised is favipiravir. Again, it lacks evidence in majority of the trials. Favipiravir has failed as a drug for COVID-19, but still as a place in treatment, especially in our guidelines, say moderately severe category C patients can be given favipiravir, and the dose is 1800 day 1 followed by 800 BD for 6 days. Total 7 days course. First day it is 1800 milligram BD, and second day onwards it is 800 milligram BD. One of the biggest advantage is the dose because the medicine is available in 200 milligram or 400 milligrams. So 200 milligram tablet, you have to give 9 tablets in the morning and 9 tablets in the evening. So that's very uncomfortable for the patient also. But because it is given in the guideline, I have included in the presentation also. Budesonide, I was also already mentioning, even in moderate severity also, you can confidently give budesonide inhaler. And when the patient is having category C with moderate severity, that means the severity is increasing, the respiratory rate is high, and the hypoxia is worsening, and antiviral, which has some evidence in different trials. Again, it's not something like a magic drug for COVID-19 and all. You can see a lot of news coming from North India. People are running behind injection remdesivir. It is available in black markets, etc., etc. It's not something that favorable drug which is which makes something a dramatic difference or some magical drug in COVID-19. Don't take remdesivir like that. It's just having some minimal effect. In some of the trials, it has been found as beneficial. That's all. And the dose is 200 milligram on day 1, followed by 100 milligram, and total of 5 days course. So again, when you give injection remdesivir, an antiviral, you have to remember that the phase of the disease is very, very important. That means during the initial viremic phase, it can have a role. As the time goes on, when the patient goes into an hyperinflammatory response syndrome, or the 1 week later, there may not be any effect at all. So the patients are selected in such a way that the duration, the initial 1 week, the patient is having severe dyspnea, hypoxia, but is not ventilator dependent. So a patient not on ventilator, but still having breathlessness and hypoxia during the initial 1 week period is an ideal time for giving injection remdesivir. Injection dexamethasone is a drug which is having maximum evidence. All trials have found injection dexamethasone as having a favorable role in COVID-19. And any patient who is having a dyspnea and hypoxia, that is breathlessness or increased respiratory rate and hypoxia, you have to start injection dexamethasone. And the minimum dose is 0.1 to 0.2 milligram. That means in an average 60 kg man, usually the dose we give is 6 mg OD. That is the minimum starting dose of dexamethasone. And if the patient worsens as the days goes on, if the general condition is getting worse, you can increase the dose. You can double the dose of dexamethasone also. So, and also remember that even though dexamethasone is having an important role in the management of COVID-19, no, it's not that you give dexamethasone to all patients. Only in patients who are having breathlessness, tachypnea, and hypoxia. That is the stage where you start a dexamethasone. Not in all COVID-19 patients and not in all patients in the initial stage itself. There is no role for dexamethasone in the initial few days where patient is having only the upper respiratory symptoms. So anticoagulation, I have already explained the mechanism of thrombosis, how COVID-19 is a prothrombotic condition. So the management of COVID-19 includes anticoagulation to prevent the thromboembolic complications. So in all COVID-19 sick patients admitted in hospital with tachypnea, hypoxia, etc., we start them on low molecular weight heparin, that is prophylactic dose of heparin. So if there is an evidence of thromboembolism already, you give a therapeutic dose of heparin, low molecular heparin. And once you have already started on low molecular weight heparin, on discharge, you continue with an oral anticoagulant, that is apixaban or rivaroxaban. These are two newer anticoagulants. Convalescent plasma, again, it has only an evidence which can be used in trials. Majority of the trials fail to identify any benefits for convalescent plasma, but still it's a weapon which we can make use of in some specific patients. when the patients are in the initial time of the disease, that is up to 7 days. And these are the criteria for donors. Many students used to call me asking the criteria for convalescent, who can give a convalescent plasma. So the age up to 65, age should be more than 50. 14 days after symptom resolution, there should not be any ABO incompatibility, and they should have a good antibody titer. So the antibody titer should be measured, and if they are having a good antibody titers, they can give convalescent plasma, but mind you, it's just on a trial basis. It's not an approved treatment for COVID-19 at present. Tocilizumab, again, you might have heard of this molecule. This is a monoclonal antibody against an interleukin-6 receptor. It is again a... Okay, what time are you?
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, sir. Okay. So again, life-threatening cytokine release syndrome, patient in ICU, on ventilator or HFNC, etc. Very high inflammatory markers. It is again just a supportive treatment. It's not something again a magical treatment or something. It can be tried on a trial basis. So the major treatment modality then which we can offer is the different ways of oxygen therapy, which can start from the common nasal prongs, face mask. It can be upgraded into a non-rebreathable mask. Then that is something called high flow nasal cannula, that is HFNC. Then it's a non-invasive ventilator, and finally the invasive ventilators. It itself is a topic which should be covered as separate. So I'm just enumerating the different methods. So the 3 important steps in hospitalized patients which we use are: one is steroids, that is dexamethasone. Second is anticoagulant, and third one is a different mode of oxygen therapy. So all other things, we have remdesivir, we have tocilizumab, we have plasma, etc. But all of some doubtful use. So again, finally, reminding you, spread the message of SMS, spread the message of vaccination. That is the only hope for the future. And never underestimate the power of a common virus. So it can be dangerous, at least in a minority. And at this context, the residents of our department who are working tirelessly around 1.5 years, they were in PPE, they were continuously working against this COVID-19. So I would like to dedicate all the things done by the department to our beloved residents. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful class. Thank you for sparing your time and giving us this informative and very helpful class. So that is the end of today's session. Thank you all.